Twitter and its CEO Jack Dorsey continue to receive backlash for their stance on Alex Jones, deciding against removing him for now, and Dorsey doing an interview with Sean Hannity. Of course, all of this part of a larger conversation about how platforms decide what is regulated, what is distributed on their services, and what isn't. Joining us now is former CNN chairman and now advisory partner at Perella Weinberg, Walter Isaacson. Walter, great to have you with us. So, for me, a central question is, when you get Alex Jones on Twitter, is his Twitter experience just kind of a digital representation of his speech in the world, or is InfoWars a show on Periscope that's subject to being canceled?
You know, you've said yourself, John, that Twitter has created the conditions of a supervirus, you know, and we're supposed to, according to Jack Dorsey, form our own immune system. I think Twitter has become, as has Facebook and everything else, not just a utility, but a publishing platform. And I think you should take responsibility for what you disseminate and publish. In the old days, if I was at a magazine like Time or a newspaper like the Times-Picayune, even if it were a letter to the editor that we printed, we could be sued for it. We'd have to take responsibility. You have to have some values about what you're disseminating. And you can't just wash your hands and say, you know, we're not going to have any sense of responsibility, because what's happened in social media, and this is much broader, is that it was supposed to connect us. Facebook, Twitter, all the social networks are supposed to bring us together, and instead it's created a real poison, and the people who create these platforms should take some responsibility for saying, why are we harming the country when we set out instead to be a way that brought the country together?
Well, Walter, what's going to force that in this situation? In the olden days, when you had print publications, for example, and broadcast networks that ruled the roost in media, there was fear of backlash from advertisers. There was fear of reputational damage, but very few, I would argue, direct legal ramifications for some of these things. These platforms seem to have convinced many people that they are just utilities. After all, we don't want to be held responsible for that message that we send on Facebook, as if we are media content that they're responsible for, right?
Right, but you have me on the show. You're not responsible for everything I say, but if I become totally irresponsible, you're not supposed to have me on the show anymore. At a certain point, you have to take responsibility for your own broadcast or your own platform. And what's going to hold these people accountable? I hope it's not laws. I mean, you know, at some point people could start suing for libel, things that happen on a platform, but that's a murky area of law. Likewise, regulating what happens on the platform. That's something you don't really want in this country. What you do want is the people who control the platforms to say, we're going to try to do the right thing. We're going to try to be good. We're going to try to be useful to this country. And that means making tough calls. That means saying, well, somebody may be offensive, but it's part of free speech. And somebody else may be dangerous and unhinged, and we don't have to put them on our platform.
But Walter, doesn't this all get to the, I'm just playing devil's advocate here because this has been part of the debate. Doesn't this all get to the very sort of source of how do you define right and wrong and what's considered appropriate and not offensive versus what isn't?
Yes, and that's what we do every day of our lives. That's what you do every day. That's what you're supposed to do if you're running a company. That's what you're supposed to do if you're a citizen. You're supposed to say, I know how to balance the idea of free speech, but I also know when I'm doing something wrong. May be difficult, but certainly it's not beyond the ken of people to figure out, you know what I'm doing is harmful, this is wrong, I got to make a value decision here based on values.
Walter, one last point on this. It's one thing to say regulating content is doable in a magazine, on a television network, but on a platform where the potential list of contributors is infinite, essentially. How do you do that? I mean, is this about human curation, or can you leave this up to the computers?
I do think there's some human curation involved. There are high-profile cases. such as the one of Alex Jones, where that's a pretty easy call on my part. Kara Swisher wrote an amazingly good column about it in the New York Times today. You have to make that judgment. But you're right. I remember the old days when we started on America Online, and then we started with comment sections on the web, and you didn't take as much responsibility for something people would post because they were outside people posting on your site. But after a while, you did have to take some responsibility. You did have to intervene as a human, especially on cases that are clear and high profile, and say, here's what we're trying to do to help our country, not to harm our country.
Yeah, well, at least the pressure is rising. We'll see how Jack Dorsey and Twitter
That pressure is important,
respond.
by the way. And by the way, both you, John, and Kara, who's been a frequent partner of mine on this show, that's what you do. You put pressure. You say, hey, look into your values. You're going to be ashamed if you keep doing this.